We're going to chapter 25 in economics A level.
Sorry.
Chapter 25, economics A level, the terms of trade. We're talking about terms of trade. We're talking about the index that measures the price of a country's export in relative to the imports. So that means you are measuring the price of a country's export in relative to the price of its imports. And when we do that, we're considering terms of trade. Do you understand what terms of trade is? So the formula for terms of trade is index of export prices divided by index of import prices multiplied by 100. I think the point is clear there, right?
Mhm.
Okay, so it is measured in the form of an index because it is calculated from the weighted average of thousands of different export and import prices. For example, according to a trade profile of Qatar published. So the story is there anyway. But the point about terms of trade is we are measuring the amount of export in relative to the imports of a country.
I thought it would be like the rules of trade, the
No,
terms of trade.
no. It's about the index.
Mm.
It's about index. Okay. So that's what terms of trade, and the formula is index of export prices divided by index of import prices, which is about the weighted average. So we're going to, let's just go to the factors influencing the terms of trade. So because terms of trade is all about import and export, whatever variables we talked about here will have impact on the terms of trade. So we're going to start with relative inflation rates. When we talk about inflation, inflation is a persistent rise in the price of goods and services over time. So relative inflation rate, they said, if inflation is occurring in the economies of a country's main trading partners, then a rise in inflation relative to other countries is likely to improve the terms of trade. So relative inflation rate. So if inflation continues to occur with those that you're relating
You're trading with.
you're trading with, it simply means those countries, they are likely to have an index based on the value will continue to rise over time for them because the value would increase.
Mhm.
Though it affects your own balance, it will affect your own import, it will affect your balance of payment. But for that country, their terms of their terms of trade will rise because the value of export will rise against the value of their imports. Get the point here? The
Yeah,
rise in
yeah.
inflation, the rise in price means the price of exportation has increased. So if the price of exportation has increased, it means what you will be paying to those countries would rise in terms of what you buy from them, and that improves their own terms of trade. Do you get it?
Yeah.
You get it or not?
Yeah, I get it.
Okay, two, a rise in productivity compared to a country's main trading partners should reduce the relative price of export, as higher productivity leads to lower cost of production. Hence, a relative rise in productivity could lead to a deterioration in the terms of trade. Productivity. If there's a rise in productivity, a rise in productivity reduces the price of goods and services. So if the price of goods reduces, that means because they're going to have a low cost of production, because they're having a lower cost of production, it reduces or deteriorates the terms of trade because the price of export reduces. And if the price of export reduces, it affects the terms of trade.
Okay.
Because the terms of trade is measured export in relative to import. So if the value or whatever you make, if the revenue you make from exportation reduces, it affects your terms of trade. Do you get the second point there?
Yeah.
The third one, relative labor cost. A rise in labor cost compared to a country's main trading partners should increase the relative price of export, as higher cost of production will push up prices. Hence, a relative increase in labor cost is likely to improve the terms of trade. So a rise in labor cost will increase the prices of exportation. And because the price of exportation increases, it means you have to pay more to your trading partners, and that would improve their own terms of trade.
Okay.
Are you getting it?
Yes.
The next one, the exchange rate. I want to talk about the exchange rate. We're talking about the price of a country's currency relative to other countries' currency. So a change in the exchange rate will change import and export prices. For example, a rise in the exchange rate is likely to lead to a fall in the price of imported goods. The terms of trade will therefore improve. So if the price of a rise in exchange rate means the price of imported goods would fall. And because the price of imported goods fall, it will improve the terms of trade for your own country. Get the point here?
Yeah.
But for exporting countries, it will deteriorate the terms of payment because price of exportation would rise. Then they said any factor which influences the price of imports or export will change the terms of trade. For example, commodity prices. Some countries are heavily dependent on export of commodities such as oil and copper. Their terms of trade will be heavily influenced by changes in the world price of commodities. For example, a large rise in the price of oil will lead to a significant rise in the terms of trade for oil exporting countries such as Saudi and Venezuela. So whatever happens to the price of import or export will affect the terms of trade. A rise in the price of commodity prices such as oil and or oil and copper means those countries that do exportation of oil and copper will have a rise or an improvement in their terms of trade. Get it?
Yeah.
Then changing incomes. Changing incomes will also affect patterns of demand. As world incomes rise, for example, there has been an increase in the demand for tourism. If this leads to a rise in price in the tourist industry, in say Turkey, then all other things being equal, there will be an improvement in the Turkey's terms of trade. That is export of service for Turkey. So if demand increases, prices are expected to rise, and that would also improve Turkish terms of trade. Does it make sense there?
Yes.
Good. Then we'll go to effect of changes in terms of trade on export revenue and balance of trade. I'll be right back. We'll go to effects of changes in the terms of trade on export revenues and balance of trade. So it says changes in the terms of trade can have an effect on the balance of trade on the current account of the balance of payments. The effect on the balance of trade will depend on the price elasticity of demand for exports and imports. So let's start with exports now. Exports are price elastic. So they said, assume that exports are price elastic. This means that a rise in export prices will lead to a larger percentage fall in export quantities or volumes. Total export revenue for exporters are equal to average prices multiplied by the volume of goods and services exported. Export revenue are also called export values. So a rise in export prices with price elastic demand for export will lead to a fall in the value of exports. For example, assume that price elasticity of demand for export is -3, that is elastic, perfectly elastic. A 10% rise in export prices will lead to a 30% fall in the export volumes. So the total value of export will therefore fall by approximately 20%. A rise in export prices, all other things being equal, will lead to an increase in the terms of trade, that is export divided by import, but a deterioration in the balance of trade of the current account as export minus import. However, a fall in export prices, all other things being equal, will lead to a fall in the terms of trade, but an improvement in the balance of trade. Now, let's start to talk about export as price elastic or as price elastic. So if export is price elastic, it means the price elasticity of demand for export is price elastic, which simply means that a rise in price of exports, a rise in export prices will bring about a fall in the demand for exportation. And because there's a fall in the demand for exportation, it affects the balance of trade, balance of payment current account, not the terms of trade. So the terms of trade would improve. We have an increase in the terms of trade, but a fall or a deterioration in the balance of payment current account. Get the point again? If the price of a product, if the demand for a product is price elastic, an increase in the price of the product, excuse me, sorry, I need to make. The first effect of changes in terms of trade, like we said earlier, is the factors. The first one is elastic, price elastic. So they said here that if exports are price elastic, it simply means the price of exports is, if the price of export increases, the demand for export would reduce. But that does not affect the terms of trade. It increases the terms of trade.
Okay.
So two changes will occur here. One positive, the other one negative. The balance of payment current account will be affected because demand for export would reduce. And if the demand for export reduces, it deteriorates the balance of payment current account. On the other hand, a rise in the price of exportation for a product that the price is elastic will increase the terms of trade. So terms of with export price which being elastic, the terms of trade will increase, but the balance of payment current account will be affected. That is if the demand for the product is price elastic for exports. I think export is clear now. Is it clear or not, please?
Yes.
Elastic means an increase in price will bring about a fall in the quantity demanded. So a fall in the quantity demanded of export means the balance of payment current account will be affected, but the terms of trade will improve or increase. That is if export is price elastic. Then export are pricing elastic. If export are pricing elastic, it means a rise in export prices will cause an improvement in the terms of trade and lead to a less than proportionate fall in export volumes. The value of export will therefore rise, and there will be an improvement in the balance of payment. So, if the demand for export is price inelastic, a rise in export prices will cause an improvement in the terms of trade and at the same time improve the balance of payment current account. Get the point here? If demand for export is price inelastic, so whatever price they sell, foreign customers will still buy. And because foreign customers are going to buy, a rise in price will improve the terms of trade and improve the balance of trade. Unlike if it is elastic. If it is elastic, it improves the terms of trade, but deteriorates the balance of trade because the export would reduce. But if it is inelastic, it improves the terms of trade and at the same time improve the balance of trade. The difference between price elastic and inelastic clear regarding export now. Is it clear, please?
Yeah.
Good. So go to imports. It says imports are price elastic. If imports are price elastic, a rise in import prices will cause a deterioration in the terms of trade and lead to a more than proportional fall in import volumes. The value of imports will therefore fall and there will be an improvement in the balance of trade. So if imports are price elastic, so a rise in the price of imports will bring about a deterioration in the terms of trade. And why does it bring about deterioration in the terms of trade? It brings about deterioration in the terms of trade because people would not import anymore. Demand for import would reduce. And if the demand for import reduces, it improves the balance of trade. Did you get the point or not? If the price of import increases for a product that is price inelastic, the demand would reduce. And if the demand reduces, the terms of trade of importation would reduce, but the balance of trade would improve. Clear? Then imports are price inelastic. So if imports are price inelastic, a rise in import prices will cause a deterioration in terms of trade and lead to a less than proportional fall in import volumes. So the value of import will therefore rise and there will be a deterioration in the balance of trade. So if import is price inelastic, irrespective of what the price is, a rise in price will improve the terms of trade, but will bring about what? A deterioration in the balance of trade. So changes in export prices and import prices can come about for a variety of reasons. For example, between 2000 and 2008, the price of commodity products such as copper and wheat rose due to an increase in the world demand, particularly from the fast-growing Chinese economy. Commodities tend to be price inelastic. So countries which were highly dependent on export of commodities tended to see both their terms of trade and balance of trade improve. So changes in export prices and import prices have different reasons. So there could be a rise in export prices. There could be a rise in export based on the fact that the demand for export is increasing. So if demand for export is increasing, exporting countries will have improvement in their terms of trade and it will also improve their balance of trade account.
Okay.
Because if the demand for export is increasing, the price of export is going to rise. And if the price of export is rising, then it improves the terms of trade and it improves the balance of trade. Because it means export will be more than import. Do you get it?
Yeah.
Another factor affecting export and import prices is domestic inflation. A general rise in prices in the economy is likely to be associated with a rise in the prices exporters charge their customers. So if import prices remain the same, the terms of trade will improve. However, the impact on the balance of trade will depend on whether the demand for export is price elastic or price inelastic. So another factor is about inflation. So if there's a rise in price within an economy, so a rise in price of exports charge to customers will also mean that customers will be paying more in terms of importation. And if they pay more, it means it will have an impact in the balance of trade. And the impact it's going to have in the balance of trade will definitely be based on if it is the demand for that product is elastic or inelastic. If it is inelastic, in terms of trade will improve, but the balance of trade will deteriorate. And if it is elastic, the terms of trade will improve. Yeah, balance of trade will be deteriorating. But if it is elastic, terms of trade would terms of trade will deteriorate and the balance of trade will improve because people will stop buying. Get the point here? The price of importation, if the demand for importation is elastic, consumers will stop buying because the price has increased over time. They will stop buying because it's elastic. The terms of trade will deteriorate because people are not going to buy. But the balance of trade will improve because exports will exceed imports. That means import reduces. So that's the point they are making there. So let's see the table here. They said, okay, they made the table analysis here. Elasticity, the price change, terms of trade, balance of trade in goods and services. So for export, if it is elastic, a rise in price will bring about improvement in the terms of trade, but will bring about deterioration in the balance of trade because demand is price elastic. People will stop buying. So people will stop buying, and that will bring about deterioration in the balance of trade for export. I think you get the point here.
Yeah.
If the price is elastic for export, a fall in price will deteriorate the terms of trade, but will improve the balance of trade. How does that happen? Because a fall in price means terms of trade value reduces. But if the terms of trade value reduces, the balance of trade would improve because the amount people will start spending will be less than what they used to spend. If export is inelastic, a rise in price will improve the terms of trade and will improve the balance of trade if it's inelastic. But what happens to a fall in price? A fall in price will deteriorate the term of trade and will deteriorate the balance of trade. For importation, if it is elastic, a rise in price will deteriorate the terms of trade because people will stop buying, but it will improve the balance of trade because people stop buying, and that means import reduces compared in relative to export. That improves the balance of trade. A rise in price, a fall in price will improve the terms of trade, but will deteriorate the balance of trade current account. Why? Because import will be more than export, and if import exceeds export, it deteriorates the balance of trade. You get the point here, right?
Yeah.
It's clear, right?
Yeah.
Then if import is inelastic, a rise in price will deteriorate the terms of trade and will deteriorate the balance of trade. I think you understand the point, right? Okay. Then if import is inelastic and there's a fall in price, it will improve both the terms of trade and balance of trade because people will do more. They will do more of import and they will do more of import, and it increases the value of import. So a fall in price for an inelastic import will bring about improvement in the balance of trade and improvement in the terms of trade. Is it clear?
Yeah.
So that takes us to effects of changes in the terms of trade on the domestic economy. As changes in terms of trade can have an impact on the domestic economy as well as on the balance of trade, on the balance of payments. So an improvement in terms of trade caused by a rise in export prices is likely to lead to a fall in the volume of exports sold. So the first point here is this. If there's an improvement in terms of trade because the price of export is increasing, because there's a rise in export prices, this will lead to reduction in the value, in the demand for exportation. And because there's reduction in the demand for exportation, it will affect the balance of trade.
Okay.
Do you get it? And this could lead to a fall in the GDP because your country will not be selling or doing export as it used to do. So the value of what your country will be making in terms of revenue would reduce. And a fall in exports would bring about a fall in the GDP per capita. So a fall in economic growth is likely to cause a fall in real GDP per capita. This means living standards are likely to fall. The fall in aggregate demand also causes inflation to fall, and demand pull inflationary pressure reduces. But all in all, if demand for export reduces, GDP, economic growth would fall. And if economic growth is falling, the GDP per capita would fall. But this will also mean that aggregate demand within the economy would fall, and that would reduce demand pull inflation. So sometimes a fall in economic growth will also is beneficial because prices becomes affordable. An improvement in terms of trade caused by a fall in import prices is likely to lead to a rise in the volume of imports. So if there's improvement in terms of trade because there's a fall in import prices, this will increase the volume of imports. But what happens to the balance of trade? It will deteriorate. So here they said a fall in import prices will make goods made abroad more price competitive. This will cause domestic consumers to switch their spending away from goods produced in domestic economy towards imported goods, where substitute exists. This will be more significant for domestic firms where imported goods are close substitute for domestic goods. Domestic producers will therefore lose market share. A fall in import prices where price elasticity of demand for imports is elastic will increase import values, but the balance of trade will deteriorate. Like I said earlier, if import prices reduces, demand for import will increase in goods that they are substitute to domestic goods. So people will prefer to buy foreign goods than buying the same product domestically. And that would increase the volume of imported done, which will mean that it will deteriorate the balance of trade. So what happens here? They said, however, relatively cheaper imports, okay, the balance of trade will deteriorate and the aggregate demand would fall. So aggregate demand within the economy would fall for domestic products. And that means the balance of trade will have a negative impact. However, relatively cheaper import prices will be good for domestic firms who import raw materials and components from abroad. For domestic firms that does their importation of that produce locally but have to do it with importation of raw materials, it becomes favorable for them because they will be able to sell at a reduced price. This will partly offset negative effect on economic growth when aggregate demand falls. Inflation is likely to fall because the fall in import prices will put downward pressure on the prices throughout the economy. So because they are buying from abroad, the raw materials and components needed for domestic production, that will put down pressure, inflationary pressure on prices, and that will bring about a positive impact. So in this case, cost push inflation would fall because the cost of production is falling based on the fact that demand for or the cost of importing raw materials and components are falling. So cost push inflation would reduce, and if cost push inflation reduces, it means prices will be affordable. So this would be beneficial if inflation had been above its targeted level. A fall in import prices might also benefit an economy. If cheaper capital goods can be imported, this will help to improve the supply side of the economy. So a fall in inflation or a fall in price of importation can also be beneficial as long as it can deteriorate the balance of trade. It can also be beneficial, especially if the cost or the price of imported capital goods are reducing. So which simply means that if the cost of capital goods are reducing, importation reduces. It becomes more efficient for firms that are producing to produce with imported capital goods. And bringing about efficiency will increase output. And if output is increasing, it also improves the supply side of the economy. Do you get it? So a fall in price of importation will deteriorate the balance of payments or the balance of trade account, but at the same time will bring about improvement in the supply side of the economy. For firms that do importation in terms of raw materials, components, and capital goods. So if raw materials and components imported are cheaper, it means output would increase. It means prices become affordable. If capital goods imported are cheaper, it means firms that invest in capital goods would have reduced cost of production. So cost push inflation reduces, and that would increase output. Then let's look at it this way. If output increases in such economy because they are able to import capital goods, raw materials, and components at a cheaper price, it means they can produce more. Producing more would allow them to do more of exportation. And doing more of exportation will start improving the balance of trade. Do you get it?
Yeah.
But this is only if it is the consumption of capital goods, not consumer goods.
Okay.
Does it make sense here, please?
Yeah.
Okay. Oh, that's all about it. Great. So we have the activity to do, the exam practice.
Exam practice.
So that ends chapter 25, which is the terms of trade.
Okay.